Hello and welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast. I'm your host, Chris Fraser. Happy New Year. This is the first episode of the new year, the current year being, in fact, 2025, which sounds crazy to say out loud, but here we are. Thanks for joining me. I had a lot of fun talking with Jason Winikoff in this episode. I think the simplest way to boil down much of the conversation we had is through something Jason mentions at the top of the show, which is essentially how music intersects with culture, which is bittersweet since he will be leaving Vancouver very soon. Jason also takes the opportunity to touch on his impression of the city before getting here and now as he's departing after 7 years almost. Please enjoy our conversation. My guest today is a fantastic percussionist for both kit and otherwise. We'll get to that. And while he has become a fixture in the Vancouver scene, he is finishing his PhD in ethnomusicology at UBC and will be playing a farewell show on the 17th of January at Tyrant Studios. It is my pleasure to welcome onto the show Jason Winikoff. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do we start here? How long have you been studying ethnomusicology for? Let's go right there.
Get right into the academic stuff.
Let's start sexy.
Oh yeah. Nothing sells a podcast better than academia. So I'm doing my PhD and I've been doing it for this is my 7th year now. PhDs take forever, but I did my master's in it too, which was 2 years, and then so officially, I guess 9 years, but I don't know. Ethnomusicology is all about music intersecting with culture. And I think every moment that I've been studying music has been in some way a form of studying culture. So maybe
That's funny because all music does is intersect with culture, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not a hot take, but a lot of people either forget that or like to convince themselves otherwise.
And what do you have a particular focus that you've been working on?
Definitely.
I could take a broad guess, but I'd like you to tell me.
No, I'm happy to say it. It's kind of like a bifurcated focus. So the musical side, it's timbre. I'm all into rhythm and every other parameter of sound, but timbre, and then specifically, my dissertation's on timbre in Zambian Luvale Makishi masquerade. So there is this ethno-linguistic group in Zambia, one of 72, the Luvale people, and their drumming is just, it's so beautiful, so deep, and Makishi is an ancestral spirit manifestation tradition. So I look at the role timbre plays in that, whether it's the vocal timbre of these spirits or the timbral ramifications of the tuning process or just drum timbre. Timbre, drums, Zambia.
Yeah.
So few words.
So was there, and I can imagine that you probably got turned on to studying African drumming during your time at Tulane.
Yeah. Oh man, you read the bio.
I read the bio. Yeah.
Yeah. New Orleans is just such a culturally rich place, and one of the biggest privileges and honors of my life has been able to spend considerable time there. And the deeper you want to get into the tradition of what we call jazz, Black American music, you got to start tracing it back to the roots, especially, Congo Square was just such an important part of New Orleans, but also just the birth of this genre. So I went to Ghana in 2011. That's when I started really studying this stuff, and I just became obsessed. I thought I was going to Ghana to understand jazz better, and in a way I did, but as soon as I got there, I'm just like, oh man, let's forget about jazz for a second. This drumming is the truth. This is the coolest stuff I've ever heard.
That's funny.
Then random series of events led to me going to Zambia for the first time in 2013. So,
Yeah.
2013, yeah. So well before grad school, my relationship with that people and that culture and that music is well before grad school. But yeah, and then just every time I go back, it gets more and more focused and just humbled every single time I go there. That
Right.
drumming is so heavy.
What is it about the drumming that you think kind of like hooked you?
Mm,
Because I guess you had a taste for jazz, right? Like
sure.
you go to jazz school,
Hmm.
and usually that's enough of like a culture shock. I mean, I don't know what it's like.
Sure.
You're from New Jersey, correct?
Oh, yeah. So
Okay.
Jersey to New Orleans was a whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you're in the like the I guess is that considered the Northeast?
Hmm.
And
Definitely.
so like so you go from the Northeast, which I mean like they have great jazz programs. Obviously,
Sure.
you're close to New York, and they have a great program at like Rutgers.
Hmm.
But still, it's not. It's going to be nothing compared to New Orleans.
Yeah. And I think you phrased it exactly well. Tulane was huge for me, and I'm
Yeah.
eternally grateful for my teachers there. Jesse McBride, Jeff Clapp, Jim Markway. They really put me on the path. But really, the best teacher was the city, was New Orleans,
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, going to Jersey to New Orleans was a shift.
Yeah. And so and I just feel like that even like the getting exposed to jazz in like sort of its what most people refer to as like its birthplace. Some people might argue Kansas City, but anyway, well, yeah, maybe you're biased. I don't know. I don't think this is going to be a video podcast, so you can't see the face that Jason. But
Kansas City was important, super
Yeah.
important.
yeah, but
it starts in New Orleans.
it's New Orleans, and so I feel like for someone like me, I'm from the suburbs of Vancouver, right? Like jazz is something that I had to like seek out on my own, and I heard it, maybe as a kid, and then I was like, oh, I like this sound, and I would have to sort of like seek it out, and then being able to be exposed to it just at the level that I was going to Capilano University, which is still a suburb of Vancouver, like to go from a place like New Jersey to New Orleans, I feel like that would be like enough for a lot of
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. For me, I actually wasn't a huge fan of jazz kind of until
Okay.
I moved to New Orleans. I was a big fan of funk.
Cool.
And, obviously New Orleans is also about
It's a
as
funky
funky
place.
of a city as it
Yeah.
gets. And, but I think as soon as I got down there, it really became clear how intimately those different genres, if we even really want to call them different genres, are connected.
Right.
I would learn funk and then I'd understand how it's connected to jazz. Like we had
Yeah.
this amazing program that Jesse McBride, great pianist, one of my teachers at Tulane, set up called Jazz at the Rat. There was this grimy restaurant at the basement of like the student union, and like every week or every other week, that's where the combos would play. So that's where we got practice. But every now and then there would be a special guest, and it would just be like a heavy hitter who had no business being in the Rat playing with these kids. And
Well,
it wasn't always jazz though. It like we had some musicians from the Meters like
Cool.
play alongside the combo. So just
Whoa.
the blurring of the genre lines
Yeah.
happened pretty immediately when I was in New Orleans.
Yeah, and I feel like
that's
that's naturally going to happen. That's just sort of it's part of the culture there is mixing the
Absolutely.
cultures, right?
Yeah. So I didn't go there for jazz, but then I'm like, oh yeah, no, jazz. Yeah. I'm in it for
Like,
jazz.
oh, I
And-
get it now. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So were you playing the kit for a long time?
oh yeah, since I was like, I don't know, 7, 8, something like that.
Yeah. And was there so I guess there would have been a point where you're like, because I mean here in Vancouver, I know you have groups where you play the kit, but I think that you're well known as a auxiliary percussion guy. and that's your Postcards from Zambia group. You're playing what drums? What drums would you say that you tell that you play? Because I feel like maybe auxiliary percussion is maybe a little too broad.
Yeah, it's funny. It's
It's like the term world music.
Oh yeah, we could problematize that if we got the time in this podcast.
Yeah.
The quickest thing I always say is just drums and percussion, but it's I feel like people in town, through no fault of their own, either know me as one of these things. I play jazz and I play kit, or I do like the hand percussion thing.
Right.
And very rarely do I get to kind of do both in the same setting, which is why one of the many reasons I love my Postcards group so much. But when I'm in the Zambian group, I'm playing a variety of Zambian percussion instruments, ngoma, ngoma puita, ndamba, all these different things. But then when I'm in like Dean Thiessen's Stranger Friends Orchestra, which is where we met, that's
right. Yeah.
That's when I get to kind of do the almost like Snarky Puppy Nate Worth percussion setup kind of deal. So I got the congas, I got bells and blocks and like 7 different tambourines.
I mean, that's what I know you best from, just because we've rehearsed and played in that group together. And so, but that's also kind of like, that is a different world, obviously. Like,
and it's not what I get hired the most for here. It's funny that's essentially how we know each other. And really, I don't do that too much here. I wish I did it more, but that's fine. Most of my gigs since moving to Vancouver have been in the trad jazz kind of early swing scene, which I love. I mean, I think a lot of jazz programs, again, through no fault of their own, focus on bop and beyond while kind of ignoring the trad world. And I mean, having lived in New Orleans for 7 years or something like that, that music's just so near and dear to my heart. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to find a community that not only plays it, but dances to it here.
There definitely is. I mean, I feel like there's probably going to be an audience for any type of dance music anywhere, right?
You'd hope.
yeah, I guess.
But it's there's been an interesting part of that here. As I'm nearing the end of my time in Vancouver, I'm just getting all reflective. And, I played trad all the time in New Orleans, but a lot of those bars, a lot of those clubs were small. So, you'd get the people who like try and swing dance and stuff, but the music was existing regardless of whether swing dancers came or not. But here, so many of my gigs are for swing dancers. They're for swing dance events, and it's in a way that I really didn't expect, but was so pleasantly surprised to discover. It's here, the dance is very much connected with the music, with the trad, and it's cool. It just means that every time you're playing, there's gonna be at least like 5 couples who are doing a swing out there, and it's beautiful. That's what the music's for.
Totally, yeah, exactly. So, what's as an ethnomusicologist, what is sort of the connection between the music you're studying and maybe something like trad jazz that as it's played in 2025?
Sure. I'll preface this with saying I am an ethnomusicologist, but I was definitely a musician first.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So, I mean, it's any answer I give is also coming from that perspective.
Right.
The Zambian stuff, especially the Luvale, isn't too connected to trad jazz. Zambia was kind of involved in the transatlantic slave trade a little later than Western and coastal Central Africa.
Okay.
So you'll see a little bit of this influence in like some Brazilian music, because a lot of the groups I work with, Luvale, Chokwe, and Bunda Luchazi, they're not just in Zambia, but kind of in eastern Angola. So Angola to Brazil, You can trace it. But this stuff hasn't influenced jazz as much as any of the Senegambia stuff, the Yoruba, anything from Dahomey or the Ewe or the Congo. That said, culturally, the way that music fits into society, the various roles it can play of being tied to, for example, funeral rites, that music, and not just, we sing some hymns, but like specific kinds of dance music or just other kinds of music are performed specifically in those settings. You can look at jazz funerals in New Orleans, and even though the Zambian tradition is different, and there are Akan and Ashanti and different traditions in West Africa that are much clearer. I don't even want to say parallel because they influenced the New Orleans stuff. Those examples are a little more direct. Yeah. Still, you could see that music is playing in society in very similar ways. And when you see how, dance is connected to the music in so many Zambian and just sub-Saharan African cultures in general, there isn't necessarily always a different word for music and dance. Just they are inherently related. They are part of one complex.
Sure. Yeah.
So then, you go to a swing dance event here in Vancouver and they might know there's a band and you're supposed to interact with the music in a very specific way. You can, it's familiar,
Right. That's cool. I love that. I love that concept of it being sort of an all-encompassing term rather than two separate things.
Yeah.
Because linguistically, it ends up having an effect, right? Where dancers are dancers, musicians are musicians.
Absolutely. It creates these boundaries at so many levels of the process. First of all, of who can fill what role. Can those roles ever be blurred? If we linguistically delineate them as such, gets a little tougher. Then it determines how people interact with these, with their roles, with just the event itself. Are dancers below people? The musicians are on a stage, they're elevated, and all of a sudden you have this really strongly delineated border of performers and non-performers, spectators and those who are to be spectated. And that always makes me feel kind of weird. I like when the dancers are singing along and the musicians are moving while they play, and that's.
I mean, and if it's a situation where that because I won't lie. Okay, I've played a gig one or two times in my life, and if I'm playing some standards, and I see a couple get up and start dancing to it. I've been annoyed by that. That's probably my own problem. But I think that separately, because I'm not expecting them to do that, and I feel like it's kind of maybe a distraction or something like that. To me, personally, it's a distraction.
Sure.
Dancing when I don't expect them to. But I feel like in a situation where it's already agreed upon ahead of time, it's like people will be dancing at this show. People will be singing along.
Yeah,
right?
Expectations are important.
Of course, yeah, because then I could see myself playing, and you play a wedding or something. People are going to be dancing and singing. Of course, you want that to be happening, and you're happier for that happening, and it energizes you, right? You end up having this more clear, specific relationship with the audience, where what you're doing is influencing them, and what they're doing is influencing you as a performer.
Absolutely.
And so, and that's just because of the expectation. That's just because of the preset of expectations that a wedding is, or that a swing dance is, or whatever. That that it feels totally normal, and it feels good for all those things to be happening, as opposed to me playing in a club and somebody gets up and dances But it's funny, and that I think it goes back to that that difference in the language, right?
Yeah. Well, I think your standards dancing vignette
Yeah.
is a nice one because I'm always happy if people are dancing.
Yeah.
That said, a lot of music post bop revolution was not created for dance.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, like, what were they dancing? How were they dancing to those standards?
Yeah.
Was it in a way that is attached to a tradition? Very possibly.
Yeah.
While I love the effect that music can make people dance,
Totally. Yeah.
there are some dances that are completely disassociated from the music those dancers might be moving to.
Right. Yeah.
And at that point, we're talking about this feedback loop of,
Yeah.
audience influencing the musicians back to the audience. Like, you might be passing some strange information to each other if one
Right.
person's swing dancing to, like, in a silent way,
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Exactly.
some things don't inherently go together. There is a way to dance to everything, but, it's, you got to figure it out.
Okay, let me dive into that statement because that's a hot take. There's a way to dance to everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Well,
okay. Please.
what is dance? I would say, first of all, I think the same way with music that, we're talking about linguistic boundaries and how our language sometimes restricts the way we think about things and act as a result. If we only narrowly define music as certain things, then a lot of things that others might consider music don't get to be treated as music. Same thing with dance. Is tapping your foot dancing?
Right.
At what
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
does tapping your foot become dancing? Do you need to do other things? Do you need to tap in a certain way? So, first of all, just this whole idea of anything can be danced to. You'd have to problematize it because, like, what is dance? Is nodding your head, is that dance? Or are you going to look out when you're playing, see someone doing that and be completely thrown off? Do you need a partner in order to dance? I don't think so, but maybe in some scenes you do.
Yeah.
So I think there is a way for humans or animals, anything, to move to music, however we're defining music, in a way that their movements are being coordinated or inspired by sound. If that's happening, that feels like dance to me.
I think I agree with you.
Cool.
Because I mean, to a certain extent, when I'm playing guitar, I'm dancing. I'm doing like I'm doing a funny little dance with my hands.
Sure.
But like I am dancing, and I am also just sort of like making the music happen, and I'm also on a stage just expressing myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, like, yeah, like you can have a very broad definition of dance, and in which case, when I don't know, like, I don't know how often you've seen me play, but I'll move around. Like I'm not like, like I'm not just like standing like perfectly still. Even though certain techniques might demand that.
Sure.
But I mean, I don't know. Like if you're drumming, if you're playing a drum kit, how is that not dancing?
Exactly. I mean, it's choreography, and sometimes I've talked to drummers who explain brushes to me as choreography.
Right.
And it's just, if that's not dance, or if that's dance, and I can dance to a ballad played with just brushes, quarter note pulses at 30 BPM, like, then anyone can dance to anything,
Totally, yeah. And I mean, if you think about like if I can like think of, I think about like what my brain activity is like when I'm, playing a song on the guitar, and then what's happening in my brain while I'm, busting a move at a friend's wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it kind of feels the same.
Yeah, am by no means a neuroscientist,
Yeah.
and I do not have the science to back this up.
Yeah.
I will go on record and say that, but there's got to be similar synapses firing in these two activities.
There has to be, because you're doing the same thing. You're thinking about patterns, you're using your ears, and you're also using that as kind of like fuel for expression and creating a feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't see how that wouldn't be different. And like, it is funny because like I played a musical for the first time in November.
Oh, which one?
It was called, oh, now I'm forgetting it. It's called On Native Land. And it was a workshop production. So it was still they were kind of like beta testing the musical.
Sure.
And the actors were all really great. And they were all like maybe at different levels of experience. And they were all just sort of like musical theater type people. So like they were working on their choreography all together, and they were singing and they were doing their lines and everything. And so unless, you're like extremely exceptional, a lot of the time if you're doing musical theater, like you're good at like one of the three things you got to do, right? And they had there's a portion of the musical where they had two dancers who were like just dancers do like what they called a dream opera, where it was essentially ballet, not dream opera, dream ballet, which makes more sense because they were dancing. But they did essentially kind of like a interpretive ballet thing. And it was funny because like when those guys came in and they were like rehearsing with the cast and talking about musical cues and stuff, I was just like musically I could tell like these guys are on like a different level, right? Like at least like with because their focus is dance rather than their focus being like all the other things you have to do when you're a musical theater actor. And so like you can really tell like with a person who's like a dancer that they have it seems, I don't know, they carry themselves the same way that like a professional musician does.
Sure.
And I thought that was really interesting because I haven't really worked with dancers. I've done like, maybe. Oh, I did a jam session with tap dancers. That was interesting too. But,
well, it's all these things we're kind of talking about. I'm finding patterns in our conversation already. It's the limitations that language place upon us.
Totally.
So I work with a lot of dancers here, and something that's been fascinating for me and many of the other musicians who are frequently involved in that scene is the different ways that dancers and musicians will use the same words. So blues means kind of different things for us.
Yeah.
And
jazz.
And there's this wonderful
hip hop.
The list goes on. There's this wonderful swing dance event that just started last year, and I think they're gearing up to do their second event. It's called Lindy Bloom. And I gave this sort of workshop performance thing there last year, and the thing they wanted me to discuss first was blues. And they're like, look, like, I know y'all being the musicians use blues in one way, dancers use it in another, and just explaining what it means to us, and then them being like, oh, and even just the way they count things, it completely shifts, like, because counting's language too.
Dancers go 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yep. And it completely changes how you think about phrases. If your phrases are always conceived of as twice as long, even if 5, 6, 7, 8 is like a double time thing, so it's essentially the same as a musician 1, 2, 3, 4. It just rewires how you think of things. So when you're gonna dip people, when you're gonna look to crash on the cymbal, like these things are mediated by our language.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, like there's sort of like this divergence in language because of the just the fact that like we have created this societal schism between musicians and dancers, even though they often work together.
Yes, and I mean this goes back to what we were saying before. It's just
Yeah.
so many times when I talk to non-musicians, and for our listeners out there, I'm using real big scare quotes for that because
Yeah.
I think everyone's a musician. They'll always say some.
I want to dive into that after.
Oh yeah, we will. They'll always say some variation of, oh, like I wish I was a musician. I played flute in like middle school band and I stopped. And in those people's minds, it means they are not a musician because
Right.
and it means they're not musical. People think, oh, I can't be a singer because I can't keep a tune, as if like all the people who are professional musicians were just born with this innate
Totally, yeah,
ability
of course.
to play changes. Like, no, we all work on it. But it's because of that, because we set ourselves up, we divide ourselves as the musicians and the non-musicians, the dancers and the non-dancers. Then all of a sudden, we restrict ourselves to what language we're going to use. I'm a musician, so I think of a blues in this way. I'm a dancer, so I think of a blues in this way. And I am neither, so I think of blues as like something you hear in like a dingy bar at the end of the night.
Yeah.
Wherever you decide you fit in our societal culture, chooses the language which will shape the way you think about what you do, what you're hearing, and what your role is in these experiences. It's all very interesting to me.
Yeah. I love how that ends up happening, but also I think it's I mean it's necessary because there are differences, and they need to we need to have a word for these concepts. So they're just using words that are related enough.
Sure.
Right. But it is funny that like you end up having like so many different applications, and it's because they're separated. But I mean they do need to be defined somehow. But I want to dive into you saying everyone's a musician. Now I think like you were kind of like diving into that, but I love that that sentiment because I teach guitar and I just find it really funny when people have this very particular definition of what a musician is, right? Because you think about an outcome. You think about okay, well, a musician is a person who is I guess like in English at least, like musician means a professional musician. If you say that you're a musician, it means that you're a professional.
Well, I'll stop you there. Is that what it means? Because I do not think that everyone's a working musician. I do not think everyone's a professional musician. And I mean that just very matter of factly. Is your profession music? But those aren't the only ways to be musicians. Like, is the person who sits at home with their acoustic guitar and strums at least a half hour every night, they never play professionally, they never make $1 off of it, but it is an integral part of just their daily existence. Is that person not a musician?
I mean, I think the reason why, of course I agree with you that they are a musician, but I think the reason why people would be reluctant to believe that is because we have a system where anything like most things are seen as like some sort of vocation if you say that's what you are. And so if you tell somebody that you're a musician, automatically they're going to make the assumption that you pay your bills through being a musician, and otherwise, because like I wouldn't. I'm let's say I'm interested in chemistry. I wouldn't tell anybody that I'm a scientist or that I'm a chemist, but I have for whatever reason, as an example, interest in chemistry.
Sure.
But to be a musician is far lower stakes.
Oh yeah.
And like I'm not gonna hurt myself by doing music wrong,
Yeah.
whereas I could hurt myself by doing chemistry wrong. But,
Sure.
But I guess what I'm getting at is that we treat the term musician the same way that we might treat the term chemist.
And I think that's exactly it. I don't think we should be treating these as the same because they're not the same.
Yeah.
Like music's not the same as most things. I think that's one of the reasons we love it so much is because of how exceptional and extraordinary it is. But I do think that treating it the same is a very Western thing.
Yeah.
It is a product of, going back to what we were saying earlier, of separating the audience from the performers, separating those who have had training from those who haven't, where in reality, like, music is a part of all of our lives. And I'm going to take an extreme example here, kind of just to say it, but like a birthday party happens, all of a sudden everyone's singing happy birthday.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll even get everybody to like try and harmonize in their own way, even though they're not confident in their ability to find a harmony, they're still going to try. At what point do we start to say that, no, you can only be a musician if you do it in these certain ways? And I think the chemistry example is great because, like the stakes are low. If you practice chemistry incorrectly, bad results.
Right.
And maybe if you practice music incorrectly on a stage, there will be bad results.
Yeah.
But again, this kind of goes back to the whole idea of why does it need to be on a stage? And I'm not saying that music should never exist on a stage. I think some beautiful things occur because of stage productions and just everything that goes into that kind of presentation of the art form. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we need to treat music the same as chemistry. And I think that when we do a disservice because so many people want to make music and they are afraid to do it because they are convinced they are not musicians.
Yeah.
And music, like one of the things Jim Markway, a great bassist in New Orleans, always taught me, which he was the main person who taught me trad. And I think in trad, it's really easy to hang on to this, but in other genres, you might forget it. One of the things he's taught me is it should always be fun. And if we are denying people fun because we are, as a society, convinced that they are not a musician because they don't do A, B, or C, like, who are we serving at that point? Because it's not them, and that can still exist with the people who are super dedicated to the craft. It's not like if we say everyone's a musician, all of a sudden good music, whatever that means, disappears. Like, we don't lose serious performers just because we open up the umbrella a little. Like, I think just everyone will appreciate it more,
Right, yeah. Well, I think what happens is that, the institutionalization of music as a practice and as and the education system in general, just as a byproduct of it, turning music into an academic pursuit.
Yeah, it's strange.
Makes it so that we're very outcome focused. So, nobody, like, you can't, like, we're treating music as though there's like this. We're gonna make better music. Mm-hmm. Like, we're gonna make, like, if the more you work on, the more you shed, the more you work on your instrument, the more you listen to Charlie Parker records, eventually you're going to be able to make like a better, more efficient music.
Exactly.
Or something, right? Like, as though it was chemistry. Like, we're trying to, I guess, like, chemistry, the pursuit is to come up with some miracle drug or something like that.
Yeah.
There is no stakes in music, right? And we're trying to inject stakes into them because you can get graded, or you can get a scholarship, or you can get a record deal or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think going even a step bigger. And I feel confident saying this as an academic. I guess that's one of the hats I wear. I don't think it's just a result or a ramification of the academicization of music. I think it's just what happens when you try and put something as beautiful and free as music into a capitalist society.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you could certainly make that argument.
Yeah, not a hot take.
Right. Yeah, and I think either way it happens. I think learning about music through an academic institution is the default way of learning about music in a capitalist society.
Yes. Yeah.
So, not to get socio-political on the jazz podcast here, but I guess it was bound to happen.
It's political music.
That's true. It's an unintended ramification, but it is. It's this kind of thing is probably present in all sorts of craft and vocation.
Yeah, and to that point, I want to say we've been treating chemistry unfairly. I'm sure a lot of people would say that chemistry suffers from the same things we're talking about.
I was also thinking that as well. And while I was making that argument, I'm like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are like, well, at heart, everybody's a chemist.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah.
We're doing all sorts of chemistry inside of our bodies at any given time. So.
If there are any chemists listening, we apologize. We mean you no harm.
Yeah. Please reach out and let me know if there's any if I've made any serious misstatements on the chemical field.
If you or a loved one has been harmed by a jazz musician speaking about chemistry, please call this number. Yeah,
it's true. Chemistry's catching strays on this episode. It's not fair. Okay, well, man, this is a great conversation. I'm having a good time.
Look at us go.
Yeah. So, you're originally from New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
You lived in New Orleans for a while, and you studied. Mm-hmm. Where did you get your master's?
Then, poor Boston. Then I moved to Boston, and
okay.
Boston just never stood a chance in my eyes after that long in New Orleans.
Right? Yeah. Where did you study in Boston?
I was at Tufts, which in technically Somerville. Randomly, it's like one of the best places to study African drumming in North America, which you would never imagine that would be in North America in general.
Oh, well, diasporas are funny that way.
For sure.
So, and you I guess you were just there for a couple of years, and then did you come straight to Vancouver after that?
Yeah. So from Boston, I came to Vancouver in 2018, and I didn't really know much about the music scene when I came.
You've only lived here since 2018?
Is that only, or?
I said only, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It both feels like a long time and like no time at the same time.
I mean, I feel like, this is the longest conversation I've ever had with you.
I know. But, look at us.
Yeah. But I mean, I feel like you've been like a good part of the scene. I mean, I guess 2018 it's 2025 now. So, I mean, you've been, we had COVID, but I mean, like,
oh boy, did we.
But, like 6 years is decent.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time. I mean, if you're just doing your PhD, did you come right to UBC?
Yeah, I moved here more or less solely for that. I mean, I got into schools in other places, and I wanted to be here for a variety of reasons. But even though I've
heard that the ethnomusicology department at UBC is like pretty good.
Yeah, and it's got a very particular focus, which is something I'm into. It's very much into analysis, so it blends the disciplinary boundaries between music theory and ethnomusicology. And if you can't tell by now, I like blurring those kinds of disciplinary genre lines. But yeah, so I moved here kind of knowing about the program and not knowing about Vancouver, but knowing that this would be a pretty nice place to live while I study. And man, just so quickly I was able to find ways to be a part of this community, fill roles that I think people wanted to be filled rather than me coming in and like stepping on toes and just being like, oh, I'm gonna do my own thing. I don't care what the community wants. Like
Okay, yeah.
and it's something I'm really grateful for is that, I've been able to exist here musically and do so many vastly different musical things here. Anything like the Postcards project, Postcards from Zambia, that's something I've wanted to do since like 2013. And it could happen here. And this is a town where I can do that. 2 days later, play a swing dance, and then like a week later, do this 14-person Rocky Horror thing. It's just like, if that's not like, I never envisioned that I would have been able to make all three of those things happen among the other musical things that I'm grateful to be a part of happen in this city.
Wow, that's really cool.
It's been beautiful, man. It's as I look back, I'm just able to smile at what the city, the scene, the community's been able to provide.
That's really cool. Yeah. I'm very interested to hear from the perspective of somebody who is relatively newly in the city.
Yeah.
I mentioned before we started recording, I did an episode with John Gross, and he's from Los Angeles, and he lived in Los Angeles. He lived in Portland, Oregon for most of his life, and he only moved up to Vancouver in 2015. And so it was interesting to see his perspective on the city.
Sure.
And I have the opposite perspective. I'm from here. I've lived here my whole life, and I'm I've been I've only been part of the Vancouver scene. I've spent small stints in other places, but like so it's really interesting to hear the perspective. So you find that Vancouver is active enough of a scene that you are able to play a bunch of different gigs, it sounds like.
Definitely.
But also there's like space for you to be able to fill those roles.
Yeah, and I mean there's so many things about the scene here that's been just like a really pleasant surprise, and maybe it's because I came in just with no expectations, not necessarily low expectations. I just didn't know.
Yeah. What was your impression of Vancouver before you moved here?
Completely misinformed. Probably what like a lot of people from the US think.
Were you expecting more snow?
Yeah, I really was. And I was so bummed. I'm from Jersey. I like snow. And, I thought, oh, yeah, y'all had the Winter Olympics. Like, there's going to be snow.
Yeah, that was a mess.
Yeah, so I've learned. I've learned a lot.
We had to order snow from other places.
Jeez, there's so much to unpack with that. I didn't really know much about coming here. I knew I'd be able to get good ramen. That was one of the few things I knew before I came here.
That is true. Yeah.
And that has...
I'm sure that's paid off.
Oh my goodness. It was like the one expectation I came in, and it's been so surpassed. I had ramen last night. Santuka. Shout out to Santuka if you're listening.
Santuka, yeah.
But it's not just that I've been able to, do all these different musical projects. It's like meeting people. Like this is, and like that comes off as a cliche, but I mean in a very concrete way. Like I am able to play gigs with people I know, and then still meet a new person on like every gig I play. Or and I thought this was a small scene, and like once I start getting in the know, people are like, oh yeah, we're a small but mighty scene. But it's like, man, I don't know how small of a scene it is if I'm actively gigging and still meeting new people. Like every week. And
are you staying within the boundaries of Vancouver proper on most of these gigs?
Yeah, I think most of them. I mean, New West a few times. Like
mostly Lower Mainland. Yeah,
and maybe it's a product of, I've got a particular way of being a part of the music scene. Like it's not the most gigs I've ever played in my life. But no, I'm still meeting new musicians all the time, or having deeper conversation with
Yep.
with them, or or just someone, oh, I haven't played with you since 2019 or something. And there are enough
Right.
gigs happening here that can happen pretty consistently, and I don't
Totally.
think that's something we should take for granted.
That's really cool. I love that perspective. Did you, when you first got here, like, was there anybody that kind of like in particular made you feel welcome?
Yeah.
Or yeah, like just sort of like held the door open for you a little bit, or
Definitely. So some of these answers might be very obvious, and then others maybe you'll want to have seen coming. Jen Hodge, being a trad musician,
yeah,
before I even moved here, I started putting out the little feelers like, hey, y'all, I'm moving to town. I play trad. Is there anyone I need to meet? And this was back when Jen still had the weekly thing at Guilt. And she's like,
Right.
oh, I play here, come. And I think I sat in that night, and
Wow.
that led to stuff. Mark Lindy and Mike Curry, they had this group, the Terminal, or still do, Terminal City Brass Band. They played all the time at Weesey Bistro, rest in peace. This little New Orleans themed restaurant on Granville. And that was another thing that it was like, hey, I'm moving to town. Who plays this kind of music? They told me to come, and sat in with them the first night. And then those were some of the first gigs I got. But then also, like, going back to the whole connection between music and dance, I apologize because I might be misspeaking, but I think they're called the Van City Hot Jazz or Vancouver Hot Jazz Society or something like that, with Sam Huang. They had, Heroes Welcome, before it was Heroes Welcome, was, what was it, NF 298. It was this Legion. And that's where the Hot Jazz Jam was. And
that's right.
Jazz jams, not a hot take, are very important to musicians, scenes, communities.
Totally.
And that was one of the ways I got in. And not only was I grateful to the musicians who let me sit in, like Brad Shigeta was always playing there, but the organizers, the dancers, like Sam was, I think, the person who gave me my first band leading gig in town. And, I play in a lot of people's projects, but I love band leading. And that was something I was able to do pretty quickly because of this dance to music connection. And then it's just like every other musician I've met has in some way shaped how much I've been able to be a part of the scene. Meeting Bonnie was a big thing as a trad musician. Yeah. Dean, and just, so many people in town. They've all helped me get here.
That's awesome. That's great. And it's it's a shame that you're leaving town. Is it a visa thing, or are you just finishing the degree? Like,
oh, I wish I was finishing. I will finish.
I believe in you.
Thanks, man. But not for a little. No, my partner, who I met here. Another thing Vancouver has gifted me. It's funny. She and I are both from New Jersey, but we met here. And
wow.
And she got a great job back in Connecticut. So following her. So that's why I'm leaving. Not a visa thing.
What are the chances?
I know. It's life is circular,
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And so you're moving to Connecticut.
I am. Yeah.
Or Northeast.
Northeast, New England. Getting back into it. Yeah.
Yeah. And have you done some research in about New Haven?
Just about as much as I did with Vancouver. So
well, maybe you're on the right track. Maybe you're onto something. Maybe you gotta put yourself in a situation to be surprised.
There you go. I'm hoping if I could find a fraction of what I found here, then I'll be all right.
Wow. That's a great way to end the podcast. Just that statement alone. So, I'd really like to thank you for doing this.
Oh my goodness.
And your show is going to be coming up on the 17th.
Yes. And so much of what we've been discussing here today, I think will be on display at that show. So
Great. Yeah. Like what's going to be featured? Like which band is it? Is it the
yeah,
Postcards from Zambia?
fair question. It is kind of all of the bands.
Okay.
So here's what's happening. We're doing 2 sets.
Yeah.
And the first set's going to be the like scare quotes for our listening audience, the like modern contemplative jazz set.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a bunch of different things. It's going to be like my Crescent group, which is a group that plays like,
You play the kit on that one.
yeah, I play kit, and that's like a group dedicated to modern New Orleans jazz, whatever that means, but not trad.
Cool.
So we'll have some stuff from that. So a lot of Harold Batiste tunes, like some Ellis Marsalis probably.
Yeah.
Arrangements of an Alan Toussaint tune. So we'll do that. Then we'll do a Postcards tune. I played with this incredible Santur player, one of my closest friends in Vancouver, Thais Gairati. And we played only one show as a band because right after we played, COVID took over. But we'll be playing that as well. And there's going to be special guests, like every other song, pretty much. We're going to have a special guest, someone who's really helped shape my time here. And then in the second set, we're going to clear out a bunch of the tables, clear out a bunch of the chairs. So if you're coming, be prepared for that. And then we're just going to play trad, nothing but trad music. Get the people to move, boogie, because that room is such a cool room to dance in.
Yeah.
And I think they're just starting to figure that out. And we've got this like core band. So I guess it's the Jason Winikoff Quintet. I don't know what else to call it, but we've got Saul Burson on saxophones, Bonnie Northgraves on trumpet, Dean Thiessen on keys, and Noah Gottfried on bass. And Dean and Noah have been in a few of my groups with me, the Crescent stuff, the Postcards group. So it's basically going to be like the core band, and then we'll bring on a special guest to cool. Now with this guest, we can do this stuff now.
That's fun.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, a bunch of special guests, like 9 or so or something.
Whoa.
Yeah, 2 sets, very different music, but it's going to be fun.
Nice.
It's going to be emotional for me because I'm a little sentimental boy.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a good time.
I mean, yeah, you've been here for a while. Like that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you know, it's been awesome having you in the scene, like playing with you in Dean's big band.
Yeah.
That's always so awesome.
What a cool band.
Your contribution to that group is always like so cool. It kind of like deepens the music in a way, which is awesome.
I mean, that's the beauty of the Stranger Friends Orchestra. Is like everyone is bringing such crazy stuff individually.
Yeah. He put together a great band, and like Dean is a person who's like picky about who he wants to be in the band because he composes with people in mind, right?
Absolutely.
So that's really cool. And I would say, you know, to have been able to like get to that point, just like to have that, you know, to have been able to be there as a musician, after having moved here since like 2018, like that's pretty awesome, right? Like, so you're part of the scene. You're part of the scene. You're on that recording.
I feel the love.
Yeah. Your show's on the 17th. I'll be there.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. I mean, like, try to come on back, man. Like,
oh, I will. I'm looking for excuses to come back. If nothing else, the Rocky Horror thing has just turned into such a unstoppable juggernaut that I think it's, who knows, maybe every Halloween for the rest of my life I'm in Vancouver.
Oh, awesome.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Who knows? But I'm totally looking for excuses to come back. So to any of our listeners, if you want to throw some drums or percussion on, give me a call. I will happily build a trip around that.
Perfect. Okay, man. Thanks so much, Jason. Yeah, have a good afternoon. Have a good week. And we'll see you soon. And happy travels.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you, Vancouver, for letting me be a part of the scene.
I'd like to thank Jason for joining me on the podcast. I wish him nothing but the best in the next chapter of his life. He will surely be missed in our scene. If you enjoyed our conversation, consider subscribing to the podcast if you're not already. And if you want to be more in the know about all the goings on in the Vancouver jazz world, don't forget to sign up for the free weekly newsletter at rhythmchanges.ca, where you'll get stories, reviews, and the meticulously updated gig list so you never miss a show. Thanks as always for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye now.